I'm Rachel, 31, the youngest in a family that never saw me. All I wanted was to sit beside them just once. But even at Dad's will, reading my name was skipped. Mom leaned over and whispered, "Don't make this about you." I didn't, but someone else did loud enough for the whole room to hear. They always said I was the quiet one. Even when I spoke, no one seemed to hear. I still remember the last Sunday dinner before Grandpa passed. The house smelled like rosemary roast and burnt sugar. Mom had overbaked the pie again. The dining table stretched longer than usual with the leaf insert, as if to accommodate everyone but me. I was there, of course, seated at the far end next to the coat rack and half blocked by a lamp. Dad carved the meat, his voice booming across the table. To the next generation, he said, raising his glass toward Michael and Thomas. Michael grinned already halfway through his third whiskey. Thomas, ever the diplomat, nodded politely, his hand on his wife's knee. I lifted my glass, too. No one noticed. Earlier that day, Mom had asked me to come a little early, not to help cook, but to set the table. Just the basics, she said. Let the boys relax. I had laid out the silverware, polished the glasses, placed folded napkins like she liked. When the doorbell rang, she told me to answer it. It was as if I was staff, not family. I looked at the empty chair beside me, Grandpa's. It had always been at the head of the table, but today it was left untouched. We'll keep it that way out of respect, Dad explained, but he hadn't placed the chair there. I had. Mom served dessert and leaned close to Thomas. You'll make a fine steward of the estate, she whispered, not knowing I could hear. Michael laughed and raised his fork in mock toast. I didn't say anything. I didn't even blink. That night, as everyone left with hugs and loud goodbyes, I stayed back to clear the table. Mom didn't thank me. Dad patted Thomas on the back and told Michael to keep an eye on things. I took the trash out quietly and walked to my car in the dark. In the glove compartment, I kept the last birthday card Grandpa gave me, the only one with handwriting that said more than just "Love, Grandpa." It read, "You see more than you say. That's power, Rachel. Use it." I read it again that night before going to bed. Then I folded it back into the envelope like it was something fragile, something final. The next day, I received a group email from Dad. The reading of Grandpa's will is scheduled for next Thursday at 3 p.m. All immediate family should attend. No direct greeting, no "Hi, Rachel," just forwarded logistics. I marked the calendar and didn't reply. I knew what this was, but still I went. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's the breath before the storm. Thursday came faster than I expected. I arrived 15 minutes early to the law office. The sky was overcast, and the wind had a sharp edge to it, not quite winter, but no longer fall. The building was an old brick one downtown, the kind with names etched into the glass doors and carpet that muffled everything. I sat alone in the reception area, folding and unfolding my hands. At 2:57 p.m., the rest of the family arrived in a flurry of coats and laughter. Thomas was in a navy suit, hair slicked back like he was walking into a board meeting. Michael wore a dark turtleneck under a leather jacket, trying to look important without effort. Mom wore her pearls. Dad walked in last, holding the door for everyone except me. They didn't acknowledge me right away. Not out of cruelty, but because I was invisible to them. That's worse. Rachel, Mom finally said, nodding briefly as if I were a neighbor she hadn't expected to see. Michael smirked. Didn't know you were coming. I was invited, I replied. Calmly. I didn't add that we'd all received the same email. The receptionist called our name. The Bennett family, she asked. I stood, letting them go first. Thomas adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. Mom touched up her lipstick. No one asked if I was ready. Inside the conference room, the chairs were already arranged. A long table, a water pitcher in the center, and a stack of folders, one for each of us. Or so I thought. Good afternoon, the attorney said as he entered. I'm Charles Bennett. Thank you for being here. He looked at each face with practiced neutrality, but paused half a second longer on mine. A flicker of recognition. Maybe. He took his seat and opened a folder. As the executor of Harold Bennett's estate, I'll be conducting the reading of his last will and testament. I ask that you hold questions until the end. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Michael leaned back. The reading began. The legal phrasing washed over the room like white noise, dates, clauses, percentages. I listened carefully. My name hadn't been spoken once. Michael received the car collection and a significant cash amount. Thomas received the lake house and the majority of stocks. Mom and Dad were named as residual beneficiaries. Then Mr. Bennett closed the folder and said, "That concludes the direct bequests." There was a pause, long enough for the silence to feel like a verdict. I kept my face neutral. I didn't blink. "Wait," Michael said, laughing. "That's it." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Isn't there more?" Mom glanced at me, then quickly away. Dad cleared his throat. I spoke once, gently. "Was there anything under a trust or a letter?" Mr. Bennett looked directly at me. "There is one more item, but I was instructed to deliver it separately, at the right time." I nodded. No one else asked what that meant. They assumed that was it, that I had been passed over, forgotten. Again. The meeting ended with handshakes and folded documents. Michael snapped a photo of the car key fob he'd just received. Thomas was already checking real estate listings. Mom leaned in to kiss my cheek. "We're all a bit surprised," she said in a tone that wasn't surprised at all. I smiled faintly. "Are we?" She blinked just once and turned away. We exited the office into a gust of wind that whipped Mom's coat open. Michael and Thomas were already deep in conversation, voices low animated. Something about the stocks, maybe, or the car. I didn't catch all of it. I held the elevator door for them. No one thanked me. In the lobby, they clustered near the glass doors waiting for their rides. No one offered me one. I wasn't surprised. My apartment was a 30-minute walk and I welcomed it. But before leaving, I paused near the receptionist's desk, pretending to check my phone. Behind me, I heard Dad say, "We'll sort out the storage units next. Rachel won't need access." Mom added, "She doesn't even know where they are." I stayed still. Let it settle. When they stepped outside, I looked up. The receptionist, maybe mid-50s glasses sliding down her nose, gave me a look. Not pity, recognition. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I smiled small. Always. She didn't press, just nodded, then looked back to her screen. The walk home was cold, the kind of cold that snuck into your sleeves, your collar, your thoughts. I passed familiar streets, bakeries with fogged-up windows, a man walking a dog with a pink bandana. Life kept going. Back at my apartment, I boiled water for tea. Chamomile. I didn't check my email, didn't turn on the TV, just sat staring at the steam rise from the cup. For years, I had assumed things would even out. That one day, without having to raise my voice, someone would notice, that just being good, being present, would be enough. But today, the silence had spoken louder than I ever could. It said, "You don't belong." And I heard it. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I didn't call anyone to vent. I simply opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the envelope Grandpa had given me a month before he passed. "For the day they try to erase you," he had said, sliding it across the table during our last lunch together. "Don't open it until they do." The envelope was still sealed, heavy, slightly yellowed at the corners. His handwriting, sharp, deliberate, was on the front, "To Rachel, when the time is right." I held it in my hands for a long time that night, and when I finally placed it on my desk and turned off the light, the last thing I saw was my name, spelled out in full. No nicknames, no shortcuts, just Rachel. The following week, I received a group message from Thomas meeting Friday 10 a.m., Dad's office, final asset alignment, be on time, no greeting, no context, no RSVP request. Just an order, like I was a junior intern at a company I never applied to. I typed a polite reply. "I'll be there. Thanks for the notice." No one reacted. Friday morning, I arrived early. Again. The conference room smelled of wood polish and weak coffee. I chose the chair farthest from the head of the table, the same one I'd sat in last time. It felt like a formality at this point, my role as the spare, marked and memorized. They arrived 10 minutes late, laughing. Thomas was holding an iced coffee extra whip, which he set on the mahogany table without a coaster. Michael had earbuds still in, nodding to music I couldn't hear. Mom walked in behind them, carrying a leather folder. Dad trailed her phone in hand, face stern. I noticed he hadn't shaved. "Let's keep this quick," he said without looking at me. They moved through numbers. Stocks, properties, trusts. Michael joked about flipping one of Grandpa's old warehouses. Thomas suggested liquidating some of the art collection. Nobody even likes the Klimt knockoff in the den. He snorted. I waited, pen poised over my notebook. No one addressed me directly. When they finally paused, I cleared my throat. Has anyone seen the itemized list? I was hoping to review Grandpa's original intentions. Mom cut me off. Rachel, sweetheart, this is why we brought in Bennett. Everything was clarified through him already. There's no need to revisit things. I nodded once. Understood. Michael leaned back, balancing his chair on two legs. Besides, it's not like you were that close to Grandpa lately. You were busy with… what was it? That consulting gig in Portland? I moved back a year ago, I said quietly. Right, Thomas said. But you were always more into your own thing. Grandpa probably didn't want to burden you. I smiled, even though I felt like someone had poured cold water down my back. Maybe. Dad didn't look up. The estate's being distributed logically. That's all we're doing here. Logic, not emotion. Their version of logic I thought was just code for hierarchy. Oldest first, most visible second, and me, the quiet one, last, or not at all. After the meeting, as they filtered out, Thomas clapped me on the back. You're handling this well, Rach. Honestly, that's mature. Some people would have made a scene. I didn't answer. I didn't smile. I just picked up my coat and walked past him. Outside, the air was thick with summer humidity, and the parking lot shimmered slightly from the heat. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to a cafe I used to visit with Grandpa. They'd replaced the wooden benches with sleek metal ones. The menu was digital now, but the window seat was the same. I ordered chamomile tea, sat in that old corner, and pulled out the envelope again. I didn't open it. Instead, I turned it over in my hands, fingers tracing the edges, remembering his voice. For the day they tried to erase you. I wasn't sure if this was the day, but it felt close. When I got home, I placed the envelope back in the drawer. Then I opened my laptop and searched for Bennett's contact. He wasn't just Grandpa's attorney, he had been his friend. The kind who sent handwritten cards and stayed late after family dinners to talk about books and policy. I found his office line and left a message. Hi, Mr. Bennett. This is Rachel. Rachel Morris Grant's granddaughter. I was hoping to ask a few questions about the estate. No rush, but I'd appreciate your time. I hung up. The call itself felt like a crack of thunder. Small, distant, but it changed the air. I didn't know what I'd ask, not exactly. I just knew that something wasn't right, and I didn't want to be erased quietly. Not this time. 2 days later, my phone lit up during lunch, voicemail from Bennett M. I stepped outside, the half-eaten salad forgotten. The audio played in his steady, familiar tone. Rachel, thank you for reaching out. I remember your grandfather speaking of you often with great affection. I'd be happy to speak with you. Are you available? Wednesday, late afternoon. There was a pause before he added, This is not a rushed matter. Take your time, but I do think it's important we speak. My fingers trembled slightly as I texted back, Wednesday at 3 works. Thank you. The days leading up to the meeting felt oddly suspended, like I was walking on a lake frozen just thin enough to creak but not crack. No one in the family mentioned the meeting again. Not in texts, not in calls. It was as if it hadn't happened. On Wednesday, I wore navy. It was Grandpa's favorite color. He used to say, it's quiet strength. Black shouts. Navy just is. Bennett's office was nestled in a brownstone off a quieter part of town, tucked between a law library and a florist that still hand-tied their bouquets. He greeted me at the door himself. No receptionist, no assistant. Rachel, he said, extending a hand. You look just like your grandmother. I smiled. She always said I got her stubbornness too. He chuckled and led me into a warm, book-lined room. No screens, just paper shelves and silence. We sat. He offered tea. I declined. I wanted to ask about the will, I said plainly. I know I'm not named. I'm not contesting it, I just need to understand. He leaned back, fingertips pressed together. Your grandfather wrote multiple drafts. The final version, the one executed, reflected his intent to keep the peace, or so he believed. I tilted my head. You don't agree? I think he underestimated how peace was perceived, he said carefully. Grant knew your position in the family wasn't central. He hoped the inheritance would reflect harmony, but I believe deep down he left something behind for you. In another way. He opened a drawer, retrieving a small flat envelope identical to the one I had at home. He gave me this too, told me to keep it sealed unless you asked. I reached for it with hesitant hands. Inside, a key. Bennett nodded. Storage unit. He kept a few things there, things he didn't want your brothers deciding the fate of. I blinked. He didn't mention it to the others. No. He told me it wasn't for public eyes. Just yours. He passed over a folded note with the address. You'll need to go soon. The lease is prepaid for 1 more month. I whispered a thank you. My throat was dry. Bennett rested his hand lightly on mine. Rachel, your grandfather trusted your quiet. He once said to me, Rachel doesn't raise her voice. That's how I know she listens best. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. When I left his office, the florist next door was placing fresh lilies in the window. I paused, watching them catch sunlight. I didn't go home. I went straight to the storage facility. The unit was small, clean, well kept. Inside 3 boxes clearly labeled. One said, to Rachel, for when they forget you were always here. My breath hitched. I opened the first box. Letters, photographs, receipts, tiny evidence of moments I thought had passed unnoticed, dinner bills, postcards I'd sent from college, a printed copy of my first published article. The second box held a vintage fountain pen, the one Grandpa used when journaling. Beneath it, a note, they may own the walls, but you hold the blueprints. I didn't open the third box, not yet. I sat on the cool concrete floor, surrounded by silent proof that someone had always seen me even when I wasn't called on, even when my name wasn't listed. I pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over the family group chat. Then I put it away. Let them laugh. Let them forget. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to remember. That night I didn't sleep. I laid everything out on my floor, the letters, the receipts, the pen, evidence of a life lived quietly but not invisibly. By morning I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront anyone. That wasn't what Grandpa would have wanted, but I wouldn't disappear either. The memorial was scheduled for the following weekend, a private family event, no public service, no speeches, just us. The group chat buzzed all week with logistics. Michael insisted on wearing Grandpa's cufflinks. Thomas claimed he should speak first since he was closest. No one asked me to say a word. Friday night, Mom called. Rachel, don't forget to wear something. Understated, she said. It's not the time to make a statement. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, of course. Saturday came. I arrived early. The small chapel was quiet, filled with flowers and faint organ music. I walked to the front pew, not to sit but to place something. The pen. I left it on top of Grandpa's framed photo. No one saw me. Then I sat in the back row. People trickled in. My brothers walked past me, too absorbed in their own importance to notice I was already there. When the service began, Thomas stood to speak. Grandpa was a man of legacy, he began. He built things, companies, relationships, a name for us to carry. Michael followed, speaking of golf weekends and business advice. Then silence. No one else rose. Mom looked around, clearly expecting applause or closure, but Bennett cleared his throat and stood. Before we conclude, he said, there's a letter Grant asked me to read. It wasn't part of the will, but he said, it belonged here. He unfolded a sheet of paper, yellowed at the edge. The chapel stilled. I've built a family, Bennett read, but I've not always built understanding. My mother's jaw tightened. I leave what I leave, not to divide, but to reveal. What's written in legal terms is not the whole of what's written in my heart. Michael shifted uncomfortably. And to the one who stayed quiet, stayed present, and stayed kind even when the room had no chair for her, you are not forgotten. My breath caught. No name was spoken, but the silence that followed said everything. Heads turned, not dramatically, just slowly, one by one, toward me. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I simply met their eyes and nodded. When the service ended, no one rushed to me. No need. As I walked past the pews, I passed my mother. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Thomas looked away. Michael adjusted his tie. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not louder, just clearer. I wasn't invited to speak, but somehow I'd been heard. The reading of the will was scheduled for Thursday. We were told to meet at Grandpa's law office, a place I'd only ever passed on my way to less formal parts of town. That morning, I dressed simply navy slacks, a cream blouse, flats. Not because I wanted to blend in, but because I wanted no one to say I tried to stand out. Mom texted once, "Don't be late." I wasn't. When I walked in, Michael and Thomas were already seated at the polished oak table. Mom and Dad sat beside them all in shades of black and gray, like they were dressing for reputation rather than grief. I nodded politely and took a seat at the far end. No one acknowledged me. Bennett entered a few minutes later, a manila folder tucked under one arm, glasses low on his nose. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "I know this has been a difficult time." Michael cleared his throat. "Let's get to it." Bennett smiled thinly. "Of course." He began reading. The opening paragraphs were standard legal affirmations, property outlines, financial summaries. Then came names. To my son David, to my daughter-in-law Carol, to my grandson Michael, to Thomas. Each name came with its allotment properties, shares, funds, heirlooms. I sat still, my hands folded, expression neutral. And finally Bennett said, pausing slightly, to Rachel. A beat passed. Mom's mouth twitched. I didn't move. "Nothing from the primary estate," Bennett continued, "as per prior discussions with Grant." Thomas exhaled sharply, almost a laugh. Michael leaned back in his chair, smug. I kept my eyes on Bennett. But then he didn't close the folder. He reached beneath the table, lifting out a second file. Thinner, older. "There's one more document," he said. "A personal addendum handwritten by Grant, notarized the week before his passing. Not part of the primary estate, but legally recognized." Dad frowned. What Bennett opened it slow and deliberate. "In life, I learned to trust actions over words," he read. "And in Rachel's quiet actions, I found a legacy no bank account could match." The room stilled. She cared for me without expectation, visited without camera flashes or social media posts. When others forgot, she remembered. Mom's arms tightened across her chest. Michael looked at Thomas, eyebrows raised. "And so," Bennett continued, "the foundation I established, one I never announced, will pass into Rachel's care. Effective immediately." I blinked. Silence. Not a breath, not a chair shift, just stillness. It was Mom who finally spoke. "A foundation," Bennett nodded. "The Grant Emerson Legacy Fund. Valued at approximately $32 million, fully independent, fully funded. Rachel is named sole director." I didn't react. I simply turned to my mother and said calmly, "I didn't know either." She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Thomas stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous." Michael followed. "He was manipulated. He must have. Grant was of sound mind." Bennett cut in firm now. "You may contest it, but I wouldn't advise it." The weight of the room shifted, and in that moment it wasn't just about money, it was about perception, about everything they thought they knew being wrong and having no way to undo it. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak again. I reached into my bag and placed a small envelope on the table. "To all of you," I said quietly, and I left the room. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't need to hear the rest. I already had everything I came for. Outside the law office, the sky was flat and overcast, but the air felt oddly light. I stood for a second on the steps, hands tucked into my coat pockets. There wasn't a trace of triumph in me, only a deep, steady quiet. Behind me, the door stayed closed. No one followed. I walked to my car, slipped inside, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel still. Not once in that room had I raised my voice. Not once had I defended myself. But everything had shifted. The next few days passed without a word from my family. No calls, no messages. At first, I thought perhaps they needed time. But by the fourth day, I knew it wasn't about needing time. It was about refusing to process a reality where I wasn't the forgotten one anymore. I returned to work at the community center. The staff greeted me with hugs, a few kind jokes about "don't forget us when you're rich now." I smiled, made coffee for everyone, and locked myself in the records room to finish an overdue grant application. The money wasn't what changed me. It was knowing that someone had seen me, all of me, and written it down. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail unmarked "no return address." Inside was a single sheet of paper torn from a legal pad. It was from Dad. Not handwritten, typed. "Rachel, we didn't know. Your grandfather never told us. You could have said something. No signature, no apology. Just blame disguised as confusion." I folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into the back of a drawer I rarely opened. The following Sunday, I attended a public meeting with the first board of the Emerson Foundation. Small gathering. A few reporters, a few potential advisors. I was the youngest person in the room by 2 decades, but no one questioned why I was there. They'd read the letter Grant left. Bennett had made sure it was distributed to every trustee, and they'd seen what he saw not in me, but in my record, my work, my silence. The meeting ended with polite applause and a photo for the local paper. Later that night, I received a message on Facebook. It was from Michael. One sentence. Was it always about getting back at us? I stared at the screen, and for a moment my fingers hovered over the keyboard. But then I closed the laptop. The truth was, it had never been about revenge. It had always been about remembering who I was, even when they didn't. The phone rang 2 days later. It was Mom. Her voice was tight, formal. "We're hosting a dinner for donors. You're welcome to come. Not please come, not we'd like to see you. Just, you're welcome." I paused, then said, "No thank you." She didn't argue. She just hung up. That night, I reread the Foundation's mission statement again. Grant's words, "Legacy isn't what we leave to our family, it's what we leave in their silence." And I knew that silence now. I lived in it, grew in it, and finally I owned it. A month passed. Then 2. Winter began to slip into early spring. The snow melted in patches along the sidewalks near my apartment. I kept my life-steady morning work at the center, weekend meetings with the Foundation's advisors, quiet dinners alone, or with colleagues who never once asked me about the inheritance. One afternoon, as I was sorting documents in the office kitchen, Linda, our admin assistant, peeked her head in. "Rachel," she said carefully, "you have visitors." I blinked. Did they say their names? She hesitated. "Your parents." I froze, one hand still resting on a half-labeled folder. "Should I tell them you're out?" I shook my head. "No, it's fine." They were sitting in the waiting area when I walked out, Dad, upright, arms folded, Mom with her purse clutched in both hands like it might disappear. Neither of them stood. "We thought we'd see where you work," Dad said. "It's very nice," Mom added. Her voice had that tight pitch it always carried when she was trying to sound polite, but couldn't quite mask the discomfort. I nodded. "It means a lot to me." A pause. No one filled it. Then Mom looked around. "You've done, well, with everything." There was weight in her words, but not pride. Just recognition. And that was the shift. They weren't here to reclaim me. They were here to accept what couldn't be undone. "We wanted to ask," Dad began, clearing his throat, "would you consider coming to Easter dinner this year?" I tilted my head slightly. "Just me?" "Yes," Mom said quickly. "The others, Michael and Thomas, well, they're busy, but we thought maybe just us." I took a breath, steady and slow. "I appreciate the invitation," I said, "but I have plans." They both looked surprised, but neither protested. "I hope it's a good dinner," I added gently. Dad stood. "You always were different." That word different, it used to sound like rejection, but today in his mouth it sounded like admission. As they walked out, Mom turned back, once her mouth opening as if to say something. But she didn't. She simply nodded, and the door closed behind them. That evening, I sat on the rooftop of my building with a cup of tea and no distractions. Just the quiet hum of a city that never really sleeps. I thought about Grant. About that last sentence in his letter. Don't ask them to see you, Rachel. Build something they can't look away from. And I had. Not by yelling, not by demanding, but by staying still long enough for the dust to settle and the truth to rise. It wasn't that they had left my name off the list. It was that in the end my name was the only one they remembered, and not because they chose to, but because they had no choice. I didn't return to the house I grew up in. I didn't seek closure or apologies. Instead, I stayed where I was not waiting for them but anchoring myself. In purpose, in truth, and in a silence that now spoke volumes. Some names aren't meant to be called out in rooms filled with noise. They're meant to be remembered in the silence that follows.